Guys, welcome back to the Chief Life Podcast. I'm super pumped for today. I have Dr. Dan Pompa on the line. Dan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me across the water, across the pond.
Definitely. That small little pond between us. So, I mean, you've written a book called Beyond Fasting. People can find that at beyondfastingbook.com, as well as your website. Oh, you got me back.
Dang.
I can still hear you. I can still see you. There we are.
What happened? That's weird.
I don't know. It just cut out. That's cool. Well, I'll snip that, but we'll get straight back into it. So your book is Beyond Fasting, and you can get that at beyondfastingbook.com, as well as your website is drpompa.com. And I mean, your whole thing is around cellular detox and really looking after like what happens when food and stress and everything isn't going to plan. Like what happens when you're eating right and you're still not seeing the good functions that your body should be seeing. Like what is going on within the body. And I think it kind of comes back to a pain point for you as to when you were growing up and things that you went through. So I'd love to dive into your story first. And I think that just makes it a little bit easier for people to relate to. It's not just you or me saying, well, you should go and do these things. And people just think we're robots. Whereas it's like, no, we've gone through the shit. That's why we've come to the stage of trying to help others now as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Dan. What happened in your life? What was the big stories and breakthroughs for you?
Yeah. Well, I went through the shit. I sure did. From pain to purpose, is my whole story. I mean, now I teach doctors around the world. I grew up a very healthy kid, honestly, and it wasn't until my 30s. It was 1999. I started, just the bottom fell out. I got very sick.
Yeah.
And didn't know why, unexplainably. Started with fatigue, like so many, brain fog. Started exercising, not started exercise. I was actually racing my bike at the expert level, so I thought I was overtraining.
Yeah.
And cut back. Fatigue was getting worse, then headaches, then I was allergic to every food I was eating. Then I couldn't sleep, insomnia, went to anxiety, panic attacks. And then, the list just continued growing. My adrenals were shot, my thyroid, my hair was thinning. I was getting skinny fat. I mean, all these things.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what was going on. So fast forward, I figured out it was mercury toxicity. But, it was an odd thing, because I found Mad Hatter's disease online, and I don't know if you remember what that is. Do you remember what that is?
I'm familiar with it because I've been listening to some of your stuff, but if you could fill in the audience, that'd be awesome.
So, Alice in Wonderland,
yeah.
Mad as a Hatter, right? But, what happened is the people making felt hats were using mercury as a part of the process, and they went nuts. And I had every symptom, honestly. And so I went and got a blood test, and unfortunately it was negative.
Can we talk about what some of your symptoms were?
Yeah. Well, again, I was, every symptom I said, the anxiety, couldn't sleep, panic attacks, couldn't digest food, sound sensitive. I remember going to a movie, taking my kids. I literally had to wait outside. I couldn't handle the noise, the loud, the excitement. I couldn't even watch a football game. And I'm not even a big football fan. But I couldn't watch it because I couldn't handle the stress. My adrenals were fried, but like so many, I spent years, trying to balance my thyroid, my adrenals, my hormones, only to realize there's something else upstream. I'm just not figuring it out.
Yeah.
And so when I found Mad Hatter's disease, I was disappointed when I did the blood test because it was negative. It was about a year later that I read an endocrinologist book, very bright guy, and we became friends of a sort. And he said, Dan, I think you have heavy metal poisoning or mercury poisoning. And I said, I thought so too. I did this test. He said, well, that's a wrong test, because if you were getting an acute daily exposure like the Mad Hatters, I would think that, the blood test would be the way to go. But it's probably a chronic level, and you have to do a challenge test. So I did that. And obviously I was holding on to a lot of different metals. And then I said, what do you think it came from? And he said, did you have any dental work done around this time? And I, in fact, did.
Yeah. And so with the test, it's a muscular sample instead. Is that correct?
No, so you're basically taking a chelator and challenging it out of the tissue.
Okay.
Yeah. Muscle being part of it, but other organs and tissues. The problem, there's no perfect test for mercury, meaning that when you have the symptoms I had, most of it's here.
Yeah.
And the hypothalamus pituitary, studies show, holds most of it. That's why my thyroid and my adrenals and my hormones were shot, because the hypothalamus pituitary that sits in the center of your brain, it's the control tower.
Yeah.
For that. It sends the signals to your thyroid, adrenals. So when I was downstream trying to balance that, at one point I actually even realized, you know what, the problem's my pituitary hypothalamus. That's why I can't sleep. That's why I'm not adapting to stress. That's why my body temperature is weird. I just didn't know what was wrong. And then when he said, did you have any dental work? I did. So literally I had 2 silver fillings removed, which contained 50% mercury. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
And leach that mercury for the life of the filling, which vaporizes into your brain, where it turns to inorganic mercury. Okay. So then it's locked there for life. So even if you get your fillings out, that mercury is still locked there, driving multitudes of problems in your body. So that's a lot of what I teach now, is teaching doctors. I still take on clients from around the world. I do it virtual now, but teaching the process of where real detox really is, and that's at the cell, and how to get the stuff out of your brain. So all that came out of that whole pain story.
And I mean, until we detox those things, they're going to stay there and keep creating destruction, really, aren't they?
That's it. And you'll get a diagnosis one day. It may be Parkinson's, could be MS, could be dementia, Alzheimer's, or an unexplainable condition like I have.
Yeah, and so I mean, they're probably like the major ones that you'd hear of. What are some of the I guess more scarce ones that you wouldn't really hear of? Like, for instance, like a pain-related disease that people don't understand why they're in pain, but they're in full pain.
No, I mean, fibromyalgia is a neurotoxic condition. And there's, again, I'll give you 3. I call them the 3 evils of the things that people miss with these odd conditions. So look, let me just be clear too, this started with just fatigue with me, then some brain fog, anxiety. So you have to understand that is the start of neurotoxic illness, even weight loss resistance. The reason people can't lose weight, it's a hormone issue, and then what is ultimately disrupting the hormones? These meaning nerve toxins. So these toxins have the ability to enter into your brain, like I'm talking about. So the 3 evils that people miss, of like they've been to doctors. I have people that come to me, they've been to the best of the best around the world. And I'm going, wait a minute, you still have a silver filling in your mouth? Are you kidding me? It's like your body won't let go of any toxin with that massive exposure to mercury. It just won't. Or so heavy metals, typically not recognized, and it's definitely not detoxed correctly. Then mold is another hidden one. People don't see mold. It's behind. Right. Yeah. And once you are stressed with one of these sources, now all of a sudden the mold that's in your home, you won't get well until you deal with that correctly. So I do a lot of teaching there. And then the 3rd evil is hidden infections. So people that have root canals, or you had a wisdom tooth taken out, then that leaves what is called a cavitation about 84% of the time. What means it heals over after they take the tooth. And then 20 years later, you have an infection that you don't feel. You don't have pain, but it's keeping your immune system here, or it drives autoimmune. And it drives major immune problems in your body, inflammation throughout your system. So those 3 are typically missed. So when I'm working with a client or training a doctor, I'm saying, look here first, because typically these are the big ones that shut down all your detox pathways. And now you're reacting to the plastics, the dishwashing detergents,
everything else. Yeah,
exactly.
So let's just recap on that. Hidden infections. You've got the things from your heavy metal poisonings. What was the first one?
Yeah, so heavy metals was the first one in the order I gave them. Mold is hidden.
Yeah, okay,
mold.
So it's afterwards, yeah.
Let me give your listeners some tests to run here that you could do. So, for example, mold.
Yeah.
For $10, you can go do a visual contrast sensitivity test. So if you go to V, like Victor, C, like cat, S like Sam, vcstest.com.
Yeah.
Take that visual test. It's doesn't look at acuity, it looks at contrast, which when you're in a mold exposure, your contrast fails very quickly. That test will look at just neurotoxins in general, but when you really flunk it, it'll flag you for biotoxic illness. So when we talk about mold, I'm not talking about a mold allergy. I'm talking about biotoxic illness. I'm talking about, this disrupting your hormones, your brain, your cells. This is a nasty thing, mold is. So that's the first, just a simple test your viewers could do. If you're worried about if you had a root canal or teeth extracted, including wisdom teeth, get a cone beam. That's CONEBEAM. Get a cone beam. It's a 3D scan of your jaw. You cannot see these infections on regular x-rays. But here's the caution I have. You have to find a doctor who knows how to read the cone beam, has the software to read it, and understands how to read it for cavitation. If you go to my podcast, I interviewed Dr. Jerry Curatola. He was on Dr. Oz several times. Episode 279, you could link it. But we talk about that process. Now he reads on Skype like we are. He'll read cone beams from people all over the world to identify the hidden infection. And then you have to find a dentist who actually knows how to do it correctly.
And so when we're talking about dentists, these things are still happening. People are still getting silver and mercury fillings put in. They're still getting these root canals done. Finding a dentist that works within you, or that works within the realms that we're talking about, is not necessarily easy, but it is very doable when you find someone who will do something like, it's a biological dentist. Am I correct in saying that? Biological dentists are the ones to go for?
Yeah.
And
if you go to, I'll give you a website for your viewers and listeners. It's IAOMT.org. IAOMT.org, and that is the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. But there is a list of dentists that you could start there looking for a good dentist.
Yeah, there's definitely some within Brisbane that you can go to. And something that you kind of has said, I don't know if you said it on this podcast or if it was something you said beforehand, but when you just remove a filling, you have to do it properly. Otherwise, it just leaches extra mercury poisoning into the body.
Yeah. Remember, that's how I got sick, right? So, there is a process. We prepare people for a month ahead of it, and then we take a couple products during the procedure, and then there's a process after. And then you have to start that detox case, because once the last one comes out, the body will start letting go to a certain degree, and it just redistributes.
Obviously, this isn't the only thing that we're getting mercury poisoning from. There's other, vaccines. Most vaccines have some form of mercury in them. There's lots of different things that we have across the household that might have little essence of mercury in them. But I guess the big one is obviously that, because it's always leaching within the body. They say with things like vaccines, for instance, that it's not enough of a dose to affect your body. When it's in this small amount. But is that a true or a false statement? Are you still getting affected if it's mercury no matter what in the body?
Well, it's a false statement. In one flu shot, there's 25 micrograms of mercury, which is enough that the EPA would shut down a lake and call it a contaminated lakes. So you want to put that in the body. Look, when you're dealing with a vaccine, there's amalgam filling it's a mercury vapor that turns to inorganic mercury. So there was a study years ago, not that many years ago, but it was done on monkeys, and they said, okay, so they injected the monkeys with certain vaccines, and this is when the whole hot topic of mercury is causing autism and other related conditions, and they said, oh, look, the mercury's out of the body in 2 days, and literally, hardly detectable. So ethyl mercury is the safe mercury. Literally, they coined it as the safe mercury. And there's doctors that still call it the safe mercury. And the fact is it's the most dangerous mercury of all. Why? Because guess where that mercury went and why it wasn't detectable. That's right.
The head.
It wasn't detectable in 2 days because it went so straight into the brain. Guess what happened? Years later, one of the scientists was like, he read something, did something, he thought, they kept the brains of the monkeys. He says, I wonder if that mercury went in their brains. He took some of the brains, lo and behold, it was loaded. So he repeated the study. There it was. So the fact is ethyl mercury from vaccines goes straight into the brain, and everybody knows it. When Robert Kennedy Jr., when he was doing a talk about environmental mercury, right? Factories, et cetera, and fish, and a woman came up to him and said, Bobby, if you really care, you'll start investigating the mercury source of vaccines. And so he had this happen a few times. This woman said, I'm going to give you some things to look at, and I'm not going to let you alone until you do. So she literally didn't. And so he was forced to jump into this. So he said, okay, who should I talk to about this, right? And they gave him like 3 people to talk to, right? The one sat down and immediately started talking about the safe mercury. They weren't fooling Bobby Kennedy because of his, years of doing, environmental work with mercury. He knew there is no safe mercury. Right away. I mean, he tells this story. I'm repeating his story. Right away he shut that down. But to your point, we're getting exposed from many different sources. Look, I wore contact lenses.
Yeah.
The 70s, 80s, and early 90s. The saline solution had thimerosal in it, which is an ethyl mercury. It was going right into my brain.
Yeah.
Right. So multiple sources is how we get sick.
Yeah, it's acute levels for a long amount of time creates chronic stress on the body, right, and creates big issues.
Yeah, what's important to point out is when people listening to this, most people that I work with or coach, they can point to a time in their life where this is when it got really bad, right? Yeah, I had some signs before that, but this is when it got really bad. I call that a perfect storm. If you think about the movie with George Clooney, right, it was 3 storms came together and created a catastrophic storm.
Yeah.
And it took 3. If it was 2, it's a bad storm. 3, catastrophic. Same thing happens to us. We have maybe the mercury. We end up with a mold problem in our home, and maybe just one emotional stressor happens.
Yeah.
Stress, bam, perfect storm. Mm-hmm. All your genes turn on, now you're sick. What I say is the bucket overflows. I just did another interview earlier, and I drew that bucket right there. So, this bucket one day, can you see
stress
that?
Bucket,
clearly?
yep.
Yeah. So stress bucket, right? Physical, chemical, or emotional things will fill this bucket to one day it overflows.
Yeah.
That's the day we start reaching for meds. That's the day we start, reaching for supplements, whatever it is, right? So the bottom line is, yeah, genetically we all have a different size bucket, but we have to empty that bucket to get our lives back. That's what I did.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, we get a lot of people come to us who are maybe post-menopausal. They've gone through some form of hormone replacement treatment. They've had a lot of things go on, and then they do the program for a month or 2 months, and then they complain about not getting the results. And it's like, well, hold up. You've just spent 50, 60, 70 years or whatever doing these bad things to your body, and you want to just detox it within a month. It doesn't quite happen that easily. You need to see that these compiling factors aren't just going to undo themselves within a day of good eating. And something I've been harping on a lot to our community recently is consistency. You have to be fucking consistent if you want to get some good results. I feel like I've been going to the gym for, I don't know, almost 20 years now, and it feels like I'm only just getting to a stage where I'm like, hey, that's some pretty good results. It's kind of crazy. But some things that you've talked about with your cellular detox, and in particular your the stuff you had to do for your brain, I think you said that you did something just for a year solid before you started to see any sort of results from it.
Yeah, look, it was the brain phase, right? So in my detox that I teach, there's a prep phase where we get the cell just doing what it naturally should do, upregulate some of those pathways. Not detox yet, but just prepare it.
Yeah.
And then clear the body. I call it the body phase, where we just get the easy to get toxins to set us up for where the magic happens, and that is the brain phase. The deep toxins are what really make us sick. To your point, it's years, not months. I accumulated mercury in my brain for 30 years before I got sick. And I can tell you, I detoxed it out of my brain consistently for 4 years. It's years, not months. I'm 54 years old. I'm healthier today than I was in my 30s, for sure. I would argue 20s. But, the bottom line is that it took time. because to your point, it's years of accumulation. Look, that stress bucket, this is an important point to your point, is I drew that line here earlier because this is in utero. There's a study called the Thrash study. That study showed that, ladies, the number of fillings in your mouth, silver fillings that contain 50% mercury, it's proportional on autopsy studies of how much they find in the baby's brain. Very accurate. So the number of fillings in your mouth is proportional to how much mercury is in the baby's brain. So it starts there. The number one cause of lead toxicity is moms.
Wow.
So when you're pregnant, you lose bone, out comes lead. That's where it's stored. It's normal to lose bone during pregnancy, but out comes the lead. Number one. So your bucket starts filling here, and then vaccines, and then moldy homes, and then other stressors to one day, boom, it overflows. And you think that with 3 months of detox? Are you kidding?
Is mercury the main one that we need to be looking out for? Like, there's obviously other heavy metals as well. Is there other ones that are big, I guess, problems?
Look, lead's a big problem because it's 4 generations inherited to get these things out, physically inherited. So the stories tell the point. My wife, she had started getting hormone dysregulation, different things that she never faced before. And we did a hormone test which showed toxic estrogen levels. So there's toxic estrogen called estrogen metabolites. There's regular estrogen. So she had these toxic estrogen metabolites, which something called methyl groups attach to and get rid of. If these build up, you end up with cancer. That's what happened to her mother. She ended up with breast cancer, went through normal treatment, which the doctor said no association whatsoever. But her mother always had the hormone disruption. As it turned out, her mother had high lead. My wife's lead levels, when we realized we couldn't get her hormones balanced, her lead levels were so high, she got it from her mother. So we ended up fixing her hormones. We got my wife's toxic hormones down once I got rid of the lead, which improved her methylation. And then we were able to get her hormones regulated. But here's the point. My kids ended up with my wife's lead. So I tested my kids when they started getting these weird GI things as babies, like this weird diarrhea constipation thing, and their lead levels were off the chart. 4 generations, physical inheritance of the lead, because during pregnancy, it comes out from the bone. And then here's the other sad part. Epigenetically, it's inherited. So in other words, genes get triggered from the grandparent, the mother, and it's estimated 4 generations of genes turned on, unless you do something about it to turn it off, right? So my kids, we had to remove the lead, just like my wife, and then we had to do things to turn off the genes that were triggered in them, right? And that's a lot of the work that I teach.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty crazy. 4 generations worth. It's like, to even think about what your grandparents were doing. Like the lack of care that they may have taken with some things, or like really these last few generations are the introduction of a lot of these different chemicals, and where it was said, hey, this is safe, go and have it. And now we're finding 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, like, no, this is not safe at all. Like, it's pretty crazy to think what potentially they would have gone through.
Yeah, it's really scary when we look at this. Look, my parents' generation didn't really start getting degenerative diseases until 50s, 60s, and maybe even 70s. But my generation started getting sick in their 30s, definitely their 40s, right? That's when I got hit, is in my 30s. The generation today is the first generation said not to outlive their parents. The generation today, it's worse than just not living long. The fact is they're getting sick as teenagers. When I go to my kids' ski camps, there's medications on everything next to the bed. They're on Adderall. They're on, you name it, allergy medications, inhalers. The list goes on. When I was a kid, there was nobody on these medications. You'd have to go to the nurse's office if you were on a medication. That's how few people there were. Right? It was like, nobody was on Adderall, I can assure you. Psychotropic drugs, no way. We might have had one person on an inhaler. Nobody was allergic to peanuts. I promise you that. Food allergies, forget it. None. That's my generation, right?
Yeah.
Now this generation behind me started seeing it, And, that's probably your generation. And then now it's my kids' generation where they're like, Dad, everybody's sick.
Yeah.
My kids, 23, 19, 16, now I have 5, so 23, 23, 21, 19, 16. I had to go through the ages. But you know what? I mean, there's 7 of us. I actually have a very old picture here that I was showing to someone. That's all of us.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay. They're 23 now, right? And we actually adopted these guys. There's a great story. They lost their parents tragically. And Dylan, you can see in this picture, he's not right here, but he was on the autism spectrum when he was young, vaccine damage.
Yeah.
And, when we inherited them because they lost their parents at age 7, that's where they are now. He was, absolutely out to lunch. And what I did to get myself well, I did to Dylan. So these guys were all poisoned from her lead, my wife.
Yeah.
So every one of us went through my cellular detox, not because we chose to, because we had to. So you can see my passion runs deep.
So let's talk about Dylan for a little bit. He was on spectrum, or he was like, you said he was Asperger's like. What happened?
Yeah,
sorry, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, he was on the autism spectrum, Asperger's sensory integration. But he works for my company now, and you would never know he was on the spectrum.
And so, how long did it take before you started seeing some results on that once you started the cellular detox stuff?
Probably a year. I would say around a year where you started really breaking through. I mean, certain changes we made, we saw some changes right away, right? Where, okay, he could focus better. But the big brain changes took more time. I literally remember, and so does he, ironically enough, as a time where, well, look, he's, put into this family he doesn't know, right? My wife was cousins of his mother. Okay. So that's how we inherited. We were on the will to inherit if anything happened to them. Yeah. You never think that's going to happen, by the way. Yeah. And he was, I had him, taking these horrific fats for his cell membrane and all these things, right? And he would cry and he had to eat a certain diet. And, I remember the day he was like rebelling from it, right? I literally sat down on his bed with him and I said, Dylan, I told him my story, right? At a one-to-one level. And I said, I know what you feel like, I said, but, do you want to get well? It's like, do you realize that you're not? He said, I do, because that's the thing. Sometimes you can't, there was enough that you could still communicate with Dylan, but he knew he wasn't right. And he said, yes. I said, then you're gonna have to trust me and it's not going to be easy. And that day was a turning point. And we did a podcast once with the whole family, and Dylan talked about that moment, which until that podcast, I didn't even know he remembered that moment. So.
That's great. That's crazy. That's a really cool thing for him to bring up. That's incredible. So, did they go to the same school and stuff once you changed with the parents? Once the parents had passed, did they continue on at the same school?
No, they lived in Florida at the time. At that time, I lived in Pittsburgh. I live in Park City, Utah now, but they ended up with us in Pittsburgh. So you can imagine, right? 7 years old, lose their parents, new school, new family, no friends, new brothers and sisters. That was listen, our life, my sickness was one part of my story, right? And it's like just getting over that. And I'm thinking all this, and then we end up with the kids, right? And I'm not completely out of the woods yet, but I'm functional. I still had some chemical sensitivities going on. But, then I always say I was my first patient, Dylan was my second. But, from pain to purpose, and then we went through some horrific court battles with the grandmother of the kids. I mean, she just brought us into the courts over the trust. And it was, horrific. I mean, she was a paralegal, so she was like just dragged us through the mud. I mean, in the end, these kids are amazing, and our children. My daughter, the girl there in the picture, ironically enough, so boy and girl, twins. He was very damaged, obviously young, which is very typical. Boys, have a 5-to-1 on the autism spectrum than girls. She, as a teenager, ended up going through sensory integration, a lot of like elevated pain, almost fibromyalgia, smell sensitivities, and So she went through it later. So she learned to do cellular detox. Now she's in chiropractic school. She's in first year. Yeah, so from pain to purpose with her as well. Dylan works for my company. But the bottom line is we went through horrific court battles with this, the sicknesses. Oh, my gosh.
And with girls, that's because of they've got a certain level of protection because of estrogen levels. Is that correct?
Yes, and testosterone has an amplifying effect, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's this thing. And now we're realizing, though, that the girls that aren't vaccine damaged, end up battling stuff, autoimmune and other things later in life. So my daughter was able to detox it out of herself, that she went through it for, it was probably awkwardly for a year or so, but that's about it.
Yeah, far out. It's crazy. It's just a rabbit hole, really. And realistically, each person is going to be almost the N equals 1, like as to what's happening with them. It's never going to be the same situation or same cases as to this is my symptoms. Like, hey, you might pick up some things that are similar, but it's never going to be the exact same thing.
Yeah. You're right about that. It can look very differently with certain people, but neurotoxic illness has the ability to affect different parts of the brain, different parts of the body, and create different symptoms. But if it quacks like a duck, waddles like one, it's probably a duck. So I'm very clever at studying a mile away now. So
that's great. I wanted to talk about maybe some of the other things that are creating stresses on bodies. I've heard you talk about antibiotics before. I think we are so quick, or doctors in particular nowadays are so quick to jump to something like an antibiotic, and I think they can be used for good at some points in time. But it's every single case when you go to the doctors now is, oh, you've got a small infection, we should give you some antibiotics, or oh, you cut your thumb, we should give you some antibiotics. Like it gets a bit extreme as to what they're prescribing. Obviously, when we're having antibiotics, it's killing off bad bacteria, but the issue is that it also kills the good bacteria as well. What does that do to the body for protection when it comes to things like heavy metals?
Yeah, no, great question. Your gut is in the microbiome. That means all your bacteria, good and bad together, plays a very protective role for your immune system, your gut, toxins, etc. People that have had antibiotics a lot in their life definitely are now more susceptible to other toxins and other neurotoxic exposures because they lose that protection. Antibiotics, there's a time and a place for when the immune system is so wiped out that it could save your life. But when we're giving antibiotics for sore throats, earaches, every little thing, that's the problem. They weren't ever designed for that, and now we've created a monster. We've created resistant strains that, not just MRSA, but beyond, that we can't figure out. And so now some of the very creators and brilliant minds around antibiotics will say we would be better off if we never invented them. And that's a strong statement because they did save lives. They do save lives in times, right? But the problem is we're using them just everywhere we shouldn't. And now, once you wipe out the microbiome, it's very difficult to get it back. You're not going to get it back just by taking a pill. A lot of my fasting strategies and diet variation strategies is how we created diversity in the gut and get that population of good microbes back. So it's not what you think by just taking a pill.
Yeah. And I think about, like, for instance, a good story is just my mum. Like, she's just had a big bout of sickness last year, and she went from one script of antibiotics to the second to the third. I'm like, Mum, you need to stop. Like, it's not helping you, obviously. You've just gone back-to-back scripts, and it's done nothing for you. So what is, like, if the doctor just is going to keep prescribing you with these antibiotics, what's going to happen? Like, are you going to get 5, 6, 7 deep, and then what? Like, you've just killed off every good bacteria that you had. So I mean, when it comes to, say, fasting, I think this is a good time to kind of dive into the fasting. We talked about it before we started the podcast. Something that we've done as an introduction to fasting for people is an intermittent fasting challenge. And we're about to run our next one, but it really is just a good way to start to get people to understand, hey, you don't need to eat every hour of the day, or you don't need to wake up and feed the body straight away. You can survive a few hours without eating. You might actually, more than likely, feel better for doing so. Some of the fasting that you're talking about that you're doing with people is like dry fasting, like not drinking, not eating for maybe a day or two, and then having longer fasts, so 24 hours all the way through to 2 to 3 weeks. Like, these longer fasts and what your book kind of dives into, can we kind of, I think even talking about intermittent fasting, like let's talk about maybe what you're seeing with the stuff that you were doing with your crew based on what it's doing on a cellular level.
Yeah, no, let's start the conversation with intermittent fasting because, you know, the world teaches us, the media teaches us to eat 5-6 meals a day, and that'll help your metabolism. Well, there's a little bit of truth there, but the fact is if you're constantly eating, you're never allowing or teaching your body to use your own fat as an energy source. So that's the problem. So when you first start eating 5-6 meals a day, does it work? It does, because you stop basically tapping into your muscle and your metabolism actually comes up a little bit. But long term, it's a complete fail, an absolute fail. Look, your cells can use two things for energy. This is how simple it is: sugar or fat.
Yeah.
Okay, so when most people, because of toxins actually, and years of a bad diet, both of those things, what it does is it hormonally creates a problem in the cell to where your cell doesn't hear certain hormones that you need to use fat as energy. So we're stuck as sugar burners. Remember, your cells can only use sugar or fat. So you now hormonally lose the ability, mostly due to toxins, to use fat. So now you're stuck as a sugar burner. So follow me on this.
Yeah.
So when you're not eating, what happens? Your body either has to give you a craving for the bread, the glucose, the carbohydrate, because it needs the sugar, or if you're so disciplined, you're not giving in, it'll tap into your muscle, break it down into sugar through a process called gluconeogenesis, and it will get it what it wants. Either way, it's a lose.
Yeah.
Because now it makes you eat the carb to get the sugar, or it taps into your muscle, which lowers your metabolism. Okay, and even at night, when you're not eating, you need tremendous amounts of energy at night. Your body has to use its fat. If it doesn't, it will just burn your muscle to get its glucose for your brain during the night. Lose-lose. Okay, or we can retrain the cells to use fat. How do we do that? First step, intermittent fasting. Eat less. When we look at studies on living longer, nothing holds up except one thing: eating less. But I can speak for the Americans, but you can speak for your country. In this country, we think of eating less is eating half of our plate, caloric restriction. I can assure you it does not work long term. Okay? So short term, no problem. Long term, your metabolism gets lower and lower and lower to the point where you could eat 500 calories and you're storing fat.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know caloric restriction. So how do we eat less? Well, we look at ancient cultures that live long healthy. They eat less, but they do it by eating less often. So I was in an African, one of the last hunting gathering tribes, and they ate one meal a day. Now it was 3 hours, but they ate one meal a day. And that's what they did as a culture and families. And so most cultures eat 1.5 or 2 meals a day. Now we're getting people to eat 5-6 meals a day. So the point is when you get your cells fat adapted, using fat as energy, when I'm not eating, I'm eating myself. Yeah. I'm eating my cells. I'm eating my fat. I'm eating, I have constant energy. So I don't crave food, right? It's like I haven't eaten today, so it's like it's 5 o'clock my time. Your time, people are going, yeah, big deal. I haven't eaten yet either. But the point is though, I can go long periods because my body will just tap into its own fat. That's a hormone issue when you cannot tap into your fat. So intermittent fasting, squeezing your eating window down is the magic. And then eventually you start to learn at the cellular level to use your fat as energy. So intermittent fasting is a starting point to live long, healthy, and to be fat adapted.
Yeah, I love it. And I really like introducing people to it. I was actually doing a co-working yesterday where we've got a group of business owners that get together and we just sit at the cafe for a few hours and they all ate around me and I just kept going just normally, just doing my thing. And it got to about 2 o'clock. And they're like, have you eaten today? I'm like, no. And they were all just like flabbergasted by it. Like, oh my God, how could you do that? And how are you still going? Like you've got so much energy. I'm like, yeah, of course, because I'm making sure I'm eating correct, good amounts of foods, quality foods when I am eating, and my body is it's full of energy because it's at the stage where I'm burning fat when it needs to. That's it. Yeah, and they were just like, oh, like it starts to tweak something for them. But when it comes into these longer fasts, I think so many people think as to, okay, well, I need fat or I need sugar to get me through a day. if I don't eat on a day, I'm going to collapse. What's happening when we do a 24-hour fast and onwards?
All right, yeah. So in my book, you mentioned it's called Beyond Fasting. We don't expect people to just fast 5 days, right? I would expect you to run a marathon without training. If you train, you'll actually get really good results. Well, same with the fast. So my book is a 7-week program of building people up to where when you do fast, it's like, okay, that was easy. So chapter 1 is about becoming fat adapted and, that process of doing that. Chapter 2 is stop eating snacks. You realize the average person eats between 18 and 21 meals a day. And I know everybody listening and watching this is going to say, that's not me. I just eat 3, right? Every time you have the handful of nuts, the kombucha, it's a meal. Spike insulin, spike, yeah. So it literally is far more than you think. So we just say, eat just 3 meals.
Yeah.
What are we doing? We're training your body to start using fat in between, right? The next chapter is intermittent fasting. Now we start squeezing your eating window down, right? We're 3 meals in a longer window, then 2 meals. And then I talk about my diet variation, where we start doing a fast for 23 hours, right? Eating 1 meal a day. So then we start doing feast and famine. So there's a day, it's just as important to have one day where you actually increase your carbohydrates. Feast, to remind the body it's not starving. So my 5-1-1 strategy, 1 feast day, 1 famine day, we start adding these variations in. And there's a whole reason of adaptation of why this is hormonal magic, okay? And even variations monthly. Ladies that struggle with fasting or ketosis, weight loss resistance, thyroid issues, they need 5 days a month right before their period of high carbs because it helps the hormone transition. But anyway, so all of those strategies. And then eventually we lead them into a fast. It could be a partial fast, which is just maybe 500 to 800 calories a day, protein under 20 grams. That's called a partial fast. You still get the benefits of a fast with that. Or maybe it's a water fast, right? So we let you fast. But here's the point. Why would you even want to fast for 5 days? Because we are programmed, genetically programmed to fast. And I can tell you, if you don't fast, there's consequences to that. Back in ancient cultures, they were forced to fast. Environmental changes, whether it's just lack of food, droughts, whatever it was, animal shifts, or whatever it was, that they were either famine or fasting many different times in a year. The Hunza people, one of the longest living healthy people on the planet, they have what is still culturally known as fasting spring, where after the harsh winter of being in ketosis, in this low-carb, fat diet, spring would come, they would run out of those things, and they were forced into a fast until certain things started coming, blooming, etc. And then it become a very plant-based diet in the summer, only to become in a paleo, where I say a keto diet in the winter. So again, in my book, I talk about diet variation weekly, monthly, and even seasonally, why it is imperative for our hormones and our microbiome to do this. It's a whole topic.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things to touch on there. Well, first of all, in our intermittent fasting challenge, I actually partnered it with carb cycling for that reason, like just making sure that they are getting a carb hit every few days. And typically we try to do it like every 4 or 5 days. Right. And it works really well. Like people see some great results on it, and it starts to make them think, okay, well, hold up, maybe I don't need as many carbs every single day. But going into, like, I actually go out hunting myself, and it is really hard to hunt. It's not an easy thing, and my tools are a lot better than what they had back in the day. And I'm using a bow and arrow still, but there's a fair chance they would have gone weeks without eating, or eating big amounts of animals, because they just couldn't get a hold of them, like couldn't hunt them down properly. You think about when they're eating, then they like the feast and the famine, like you're talking about. The feasts are actually a feast. It's not about underfeeding yourself as such. Like, it's like you said about the calorie restriction. That's one form of it, but having high amounts of good quality foods is really, really important as well. Because I think so many people think of it as, well, I'm just going to intermittent fast, or I'm just going to fast, I'm just going to skip my meals and I won't eat at all. I won't recover that. I think that's where people fall down even more, and then they never go back to using fasting again.
True.
When you're doing a fast, like something that I've done with a few people is just to ease them onto it, is have them on something just like bone broth. because it's like, I know it's not really fasting then, but it's kind of easing them into it, and it helps them out with getting them through the day. And then we progress them off of the bone broth slowly. Have you used anything like that to kind of help people out? Like, I mean, obviously you've got your water, and you've got, I mean, some people like to have teas and coffees and stuff, but what are you kind of using with people as a step in, apart from the 3 meals a day, straight to the intermittent fasting?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, first of all, we just say, hey, no snacks, right, as a starting point, which is, by the way, oddly hard for people, right? So, and they get really hangry. So you want to take it one step at a time. And just like exercise, you don't come into the gym and do your workout. You know, you come in and start very slowly. You know, you can work up to that. Same with this. If you just fast all of a sudden, it could be, you know, more stress than your body can adapt to. Remember, every time you fast, it's a stress.
Yeah.
And if you adapt to that stress, your mitochondria, where you burn fat or sugar, get stronger and better if you adapt. They become better at burning fat. If not, you create problems. So you want to start slow and low. So I have no problem putting people on like specific fats just to help them through.
Yeah.
A little bit of olive oil, MCT oil, coconut oil, maybe in the day, just to get them used to it, or like I said, bone broth. I'm okay with it. But the point is you really want to give your body that opportunity to fast. Here's why. The magic happens when you're not eating, for many reasons, one of which is a word you're familiar with, autophagy, which means when you're not eating, you force your body to eat the bad cells.
Yeah.
It needs amino acids, it needs nutrition, it needs water. It'll eat the cells to get what it needs, but it's smart enough not to eat the good cells. It will eat the rubbish. It will eat the bad DNA, the bad cells, the cells that aren't adapting. It's that smart. So we force autophagy in a fasting state. So we want to keep forcing that autophagy. So maybe you fast for 12 hours, then 14. You know, just a little bit of time to keep squeezing your eating window down, and you take the fats away. So eventually, remember, chapter 1 is get fat adapted first. We get your hydrates down to below 50 to force the cell to start using fat. Once we get you fat adapted, in my book I tell you how to know when you are, then we start squeezing the window. And so there's a step-by-step approach here. Yeah.
And it's quite interesting, because you're just talking about the body naturally eats the bad stuff. When we are sick, intuitively, most people don't feel like eating, yet they still do. And I mean, if you watch an animal in the wild, if they're sick, they will just not eat for a few days until the body comes back to a state of feeling like it's at full function again, and then they will continue to do their thing. So realistically, if you do get sick, resting and fasting are two of the best things you can do for yourself. Maybe we could talk about some of the extreme cases, like when it comes to something like cancer, or like a big tumor that's in the body. The same method works for this, if I'm correct. When it comes to fasting, your body starts to eat that infected cell, or that bad cells. Is that correct in saying that?
It does. I mean, that's why people get, catabolic. I mean, the body will literally start eating itself, doing the thing that it does. And oftentimes people overfeed. Look, every cancer is a little different. Some cancers, fasting is incredible. Certain other metastatic cancers, it's not, right? Even when you look at tumors, if a tumor has its own blood supply, sometimes fasting is not the best thing. But if it doesn't, fasting is amazing. So, be a little cautious with that, right? But educate yourself. There's a great Thomas Seyfried. He wrote the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. I've been in a mastermind with him, and he talks about really pulsing certain diets, moving in and out of ketosis. He talks about fasting, moving in and out of fasting as a solution. If someone's challenged that way or knows someone that is, his book's a great one. But you have to be a little bit more cautious with the certain cancers for sure, though.
Because at some point, cancer is just killing the body as well. Like, it's just taking away from the body. And something that can kill people a lot when it comes to cancer is the fact that they don't have enough muscle mass left anymore. Like, they come down to nothing, and that's part of what kills them. So part of it, like you said, is actually about the refeed as well, and consistently refeeding the body to make sure that we are keeping some form of muscle on. Something you did talk about before was not going above 20 grams of protein when fasting. And is that purely for the cellular autophagy side of things?
Yeah, it is. So of course there's pure water fast. I do 4 5-day fasts a year, and I lead a Facebook group through them, and as well as a group, it's easier to do these things. And there's a reason for 5 days too, by the way. But I do 2 partial fasts and 2 water fasts. So partial fasts, studies show, you still go through the autophagy, but you have to get the calories, depending on your body size, somewhere under 1,000. So smaller people, maybe 500-600, bigger people, maybe 800 to 1,000 calories. And if you get above that, you're going to knock yourself out of this autophagy. Protein, under 20 on average, smaller people, under 15 grams of protein a day. So if you ingest more than that, you'll stop this autophagy. This autophagy is amazing, because when you look at why most people don't feel well, they have too many senescent cells. These are cells that live too long. They drive inflammation. They cause mischief. They replicate, bad cells. I mean, they're bad guys, right? So we all have them. It's just, if we, easily, you can measure P16 markers and different things to measure them. But, the healthier you are, the less of them you have. Well, during a fast, the body gets rid of these old senescent cells, but so many of them are immune cells. One of the criticisms, I've been into fasting since the 90s, so it was like me and some geeky natural hygiene society guys. That was it. It's like, but no one was fasting. Now it's cool, man, believe me. So I'm very glad that we're into fasting now. But the criticism of fasting was that, it would basically lower your immune system. And it would, and why did they say this? Because we'd see this massive drop in white blood cells on blood work, right? Which is true. So the only answer we had then was, look, all I can tell you is that periodic fasts fix the immune system. It knocks down autoimmune, and the immune system comes back stronger. We didn't understand the science because there wasn't any of that. Now there is. So what happens is through this atop white blood cells, the white blood cells that are living too long, hyperactive, driving food allergies, autoimmune, hyperimmunity, inflammation. But so when we see this lowering of the white blood cells, all it was doing is getting rid of the old bad ones. And now, here's the best part, it stimulates a stem cell to replace it with a new, naive immune cell functioning the way it should. So the magic of fasting is you tear down the old and you rebuild the new. So you become a new person when you fast enough. So again, do we get some of that in a 15, 18, 20-hour intermittent fast? Yes, you do. Studies show after 15 hours you do get some autophagy, but you get massive amounts more when you do an extended fast. And I said there's a reason for 5 days.
Yes.
About day 4, on the average person, we see this autophagy kicking in, and we see a max autophagy happening. In my book, I teach how to know if you're in max autophagy through a ratio of glucose and ketones. By day 5, we have maximum growth hormone. So you're massively, kicking into autophagy, and we have massive stem cell production on day 5. So we get to that magic number at day 5 to maximize the autophagy and the stem cell production. That's why 5 days.
Wow. So doing something like a 5-day fast, are you telling people to go about their days as per usual? Like if they're a gym goer every day, are they still going and doing these events as they usually would?
If you follow, like I said, you don't just run a marathon, you prepare for it. When you follow this program that I have in my book, you can go about your business. You have amazing energy. I can do whatever I do. And oftentimes I even have more energy. Now, if you have a health condition, I tell people, don't work out. Use all your energy to heal. Right? I can work out during a fast, and I have no problem. But I typically don't. I typically even wait till day 5 to work out, just because I want all of my healing or my energy to go to healing. And another magical benefit of fasting is what I call energy diversion. It takes so much energy to assimilate food, digest food, make energy in your cells, massive amounts of energy. When you're not doing that, the body doesn't just sit back on that energy. It takes it and diverts it to things that needed healed even years ago. All of a sudden you get that knee pain like, oh my gosh, why is my knee hurting? And especially this happens around day 4 of the fast. And you realize, oh my gosh, it's the knee that I injured 20 years ago. The body now has enough energy to go back and prioritize that healing. Otherwise, through the day of stress, and it's not prioritizing that energy to do that. It's not. It's trying to survive.
Yeah.
But now, when you divert that energy and have it, it'll divert it to the healing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super interesting. How about when it comes to things like muscle mass? Like some people would say, hey, I don't want to do a long fast because I'm worried that I'm going to lose too much muscle and I've worked really hard to get this muscle on. What's the deal around, like I know with intermittent fasting, we can actually see muscle increase. What happens when we go for a week-long fast, 5-day fast and more?
Great question, because that's a myth. So again, when you go into a fast, fat adapted, like I teach in my book, you immediately go into this autophagy process, and the body's intelligence will only take out bad cells. So if you lose muscle, it's only muscle that wasn't recovering. It's bad muscle.
Yeah.
So I challenged my teenager, because he was the skinny kid trying to grow muscle, right? I said, look at your mom. I have pictures of my wife when she started like really consistently fasting. She was, got more muscular as time went on. A month after a fast, you actually gain not just, any muscle back, but you actually gain more muscle because of the autophagy stem cell production. So my son actually ended up gaining 8 pounds total from where he was. It kicked him into the weight he couldn't gain. And that's because he got rid of the bad and he activated new stem cells. That's the magic. So we actually use extended fasting for people who are sick, 90, 100 pounds and can't gain weight. We use feast famine to actually drive it. So something happens during a fast to survive. The body knows it needs its muscle to survive. Mm-hmm. So it spares it. What does it do? It raises growth hormone and makes your cells more sensitive to all of your important anabolic hormones. So that hormone optimization is about survival. So that's what spares your muscle and allows your body to eat the bad. Yeah. It's not going to get rid of your good muscle. It's just not. So that is a survival mechanism in place. And that's measurable in my book. I show at what days, that growth hormone is going up and up and up. So day 1, you already have a spike protecting muscle. Day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5 is ridiculous. So all of that about protecting your muscle.
That's insane. That's really cool. I knew there was some behind it, but I didn't know it went that deep, and that's very insightful. Yeah, that's unreal. So, I mean, we're coming up on the hour, and I am aware of your time, and so what we might do is start to wrap things up. I think we've covered so much. Like, I mean, we've really gone deep down the cellular side of things, what's going on. We've delved into what I guess metal poisoning can be doing to the body, heavy metal poisoning can be doing to the body, and things that you might start to see and do to be aware of, as well as the tests that you gave, which I'm going to link to as well. But I mean, we touched on fasting as well. I think some things for people to start to think of is getting yourself to a biological dentist, if you're not already. And then outside of that, looking into your book, into fasting, is there anything that we didn't touch on in the fasting realm, or even the heavy metal realm, that we probably should have, that we didn't get to?
Yeah, look, I think that one of the things that I have to say is, tying it all together is very important, meaning that a lot of people say, oh, well, I can't even become fat adapted. And that's because of a toxic issue. So if you look at this cell that I drew earlier, on every cell you have hormone receptors. Mm-hmm. Okay. These hormone receptors are how hormones get their message in the cell.
Yeah.
If your hormone doesn't get the message in the cell, you don't feel well, and you can't burn fat. So speaking to those people is very important, because there's more and more of these people. Mm-hmm. So, and I can just use thyroid hormone. Yeah. It's active thyroid hormone, it's T3. It has to dock to that receptor, and then it sends a signal to the mitochondria to burn fat. Well, what if it can't? So what if toxins come in and blunt that receptor?
Yeah.
Because toxins make their way into this fatty membrane, that membrane of your cell. That, matter of fact, that hormone receptor, it rides on what is called a lipid raft. That's a raft made of fat. Mm-hmm. Fat attracts toxins. So then it causes a blunting of the hormone receptor. So now, even though you have T3 hormone and your blood work looks normal, it's not getting its message in the cell, so you don't feel good, and nor can you burn fat anymore, despite your efforts. So that is a toxic issue that people don't consider. So when we start to look at that, we have to get rid of those cells. We have to create new ones. Fasting provides that. Fasting provides work of the innate intelligence to downregulate the inflammation, get rid of the bad cells, but ultimately we still have to be detoxing the toxins off of the cells. You put this together with the fasting, there's the magic, right? So many people need that. So that multi-therapeutic approach is what I've taught for years. Mm-hmm. And so I want people to leave with, it's just that one thing, right? It typically is a combination of dealing with the neurotoxins, which so many people are exposed to, and using fasting and fasting strategies together. So if you're someone out there that's, I'm doing so, why am I? You need this component, right? Maybe you've tried some of this component, but you need some of these feast, famine, fasting, diet variation strategies, right? So putting them together is the magic.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. And you've actually inspired me to do a longer fast, so that's great. I'm definitely going to do it. I've got a competition coming up next month, so I'm going to focus in on that, and then once I finish that competition, I'm going to do a week-long fast for sure. That's great.
You're designed to fast. Our DNA is set up for it, right? Yeah. More studies are showing that without times of famine, we're actually creating diseases like cancer. And I actually quote that study. I just did a talk last week, and I showed that study. So, we have to realize that we need this to turn off genes that have been triggered for many, many years. Right? We turn on genes via stressors, physical, chemical, or emotional. I said that earlier, how like Mercury can turn a gene on like it did me. Yeah. Fasting is a magic that if you just even do one a year, you have now the ability to turn off those genes that have been turned on. And by the way, your gut microbiome, you stress them during a fast to where the fast actually creates a diversity because they get stronger, they get better, just like your cells. So fasting, you need to create a gut, heal a gut, create more diversity. And fasting, you need to turn off bad genes.
Can I ask you, just before we finish up, what are your thoughts on teas and coffees during fasting?
Great question. In my book, the answer is this. You have to test. It's different for everybody. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned Thomas Safe. He had said when they're watching tumors shrink, when the tumors stop, they know that the autophagy stopped, right? Where this body's not eating the bad cells. So they realized it was a lot of people who were drinking coffee or tea during their fasting state. He said, well, why wasn't it happening with everybody? So he realized that it was the people doing that when their glucose went up, they were the people that stopped their autophagy. The people that were drinking their coffee and tea, their glucose didn't rise. They didn't stop autophagy. So I was like, well, the average person should be using this. It's a good idea. So in my book, I talk about how to test. You want to take your glucose 30 minutes or right before you drink your coffee or tea and 30 minutes after. If it rises above 5 on average, you have to do a few days. Your coffee or tea is not good in your fasting state. It's knocking you out of autophagy. So what do? Switch something. If you drink fat coffee, try black coffee. If you drink black, try fat. If you drink tea, try coffee. If you drink coffee, try tea. You get the point.
Is that anything to do with how they metabolize the caffeine?
Absolutely could be. But here's the thing. Sometimes it could be something just in the tea or coffee that's elevating the cortisol. Yeah. In cortisol, glucose follows cortisol. It could be the caffeine. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is.
That's really cool. That's insightful. Get yourselves a glucose monitor. Yeah. I'm actually going to test that. That's really cool. I'm going to buy your book and read it properly before I go through this long fast. But yes, go on.
On my Facebook right now, I'm doing a little test. I took 25 people. We're kind of in the heart of it. Yeah. So these are the people who did this test, and they realized, I can't do coffee in my intermittent fasting window. So I'm bummed about that. So this gentleman introduced a specific kava to me. Mm-hmm. Kava drops cortisol. Yes. And they notice, if you drop cortisol, you can drop glucose. So we're testing to see if adding some kava with or in your coffee actually will solve the problem. So we just started the test. We just took 25 people, and we're going to run that test to see if this could be an answer for drink your coffee.
I'd be intrigued to see if ashwagandha would do the same thing, because it's also a cortisol dropper. Yeah. That's interesting. That's really cool. I'll look forward to seeing that then, how that comes out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, excellent. Well, Dr. Dan, thank you so much. Everyone, you guys can find him at drpompa.com or beyondfastingbook.com. I really love this conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too, mate. But it's been really cool to have you on. And maybe we can have another one after I've gone through the fast. I think I might even get a little group happening within our community and see who's up for it. I think that'd be great.
Yep. If you do that, bring me on for a quick encouragement and talk about the benefits. I'll love to do that.
That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it.